Hello, my name is Robbie. Now in this first part, I'd like to ask some questions about yourself. Can you tell me a little about where you're living at the moment?
I have just recently moved to Toronto. I have visited the city before, and living here feels quite different, I must say. It's a great city to live in. It's one of the most welcoming places I've been to, no matter what is your background, your gender, sexuality, or country, nationality. People really don't care, and I say this in the best way possible. It's a very, very safe city. It's beautiful. And something that has been quite surprising to me is that it is not actually as cold as some people say it is. Yes, I know it can get quite tough during the winter, but yet it's definitely not unbearable. And you don't stay inside hibernating for 8 months per year, as some people say. It's a great place to be in.
Do you prefer living in a house or an apartment?
Well, there are definitely advantages and disadvantages to either of these two options. Um, Having a house implies you can have a dog, you can have space to have your piano, you can invite friends for a barbecue over the weekend. And if you have an apartment, even though it does come at the cost of having less space, most likely for you to live in, generally apartments tend to be better located for the same price as a house. So for me particularly, given that I consider myself a very cosmopolitan person, I love living in a big city, cinema, theater, opera, being able to buy anything I need, just a few blocks away from home. I do prefer to live in an apartment.
What are some of the things you like to do at weekends in the summer?
Well, I'm Brazilian and Portuguese, but born and raised in Brazil. And ironically, I am not really a summer kind of person. I do prefer winter. When it's summertime, I feel hot all the time and I can barely walk in the street without feeling all sweaty and smelly. So I do prefer to stay home or to go to places where there is air conditioning during summertime. So what I mean by this is I like to go to libraries, I like to go to bookstores, I like to go to the cinema. Eventually, I go to some parks to have a walk in the park with some of my friends. But I mostly try to avoid as much as possible being out there in the summer, in the sun during the summer.
What are some of the things that families do together at weekends in your country?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer this question as a Brazilian rather than as somebody that has just recently moved to Canada. In Brazil, there are a lot of social disparities, and I would say that what people do in the weekend is mostly defined by where do they live. If they live in the more affluent areas of the city, it's easier for you to have access to places such as the beach, good parks, and so on. So let's say you'd meet your friends on the beach, have a beer with them, take your family to walk in the park, and so on. Mostly outdoors activities. And if you are in an area of the city where you have less infrastructure, you generally rely on indoor spaces such as shopping centers, shopping malls, cinema, and so on.
Now I'm going to ask about shopping. Do you like shopping?
Do I like shopping? Well, I think most people do. It does cater to some of the very primal instincts we have of gathering, accumulating. But when it comes to actual choices, though, I tend not to really buy a lot of things related to clothing, for example, and be more rational. But when it comes to technology, on the other hand, I do spend a lot of money in technology because I think it's something that makes our life much easier and better. But that's it. I don't like spending time buying stuff though. I much prefer to order online rather than going all the way to a shopping center and buying something there.
Do you feel it's true that women like shopping more than men?
I do not believe I do not really believe that women shop more than men. I think there is a bit of implicit bias there, and also some might even say a bit of sexism. What I feel, what I think actually happens is women are allowed and have been allowed for many reasons, historical reasons and societal reasons, to express their desire to shop more. And they were treated as if they were to stay at home and take care of the family, right, for so many years. Whereas men are supposed to be tough and they cannot have as many simple desires for trivial things like buying a new gadget or new clothing. But look, the market for male cosmetics and for men's clothes is increasing exponentially lately. So I do think it is changing. This perception is changing.
Now in the second part, I'm going to give you a topic. I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say, and you can make some notes. Do you understand? Here is your topic.
All right. So, oddly enough, I don't quite remember the name of the place that I want to talk about. But the place that has become one of my favorite restaurants in the world is an Italian restaurant located in Copacabana neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. I have a very good friend. There is an American guy, and he once said that I should visit this place because the food was quite spectacular, the price was fair for what they were serving, and actually, it was New York level of service in Rio. If you go to Brazilian restaurants, you almost have to beg sometimes for the waiter to come and bring the menu, or have to beg for them to bring the bill for you to pay before you leave. So I went to this restaurant and actually it was surprisingly cheap compared to my previous expectation. The food was very, very good, nice environment, but more than anything, I really did feel like I was out of Brazil for a while. The service was top notch. They were very, very attentive. When there was one drink that I liked, the waiter brought the barman to make a special version of the drink for everybody on the table. The food was done exactly as I asked them to do. I have some dietary restrictions, and they were very, very glad to take into consideration all of my requests. So it's interesting how more than just food, the service and experience that I have in a place define how much you like it. It also defines how likely you are to recommend that place for somebody else in the future. So yeah, I wish I would remember the name of the place, but it's an Italian restaurant in Copacabana, close to the Ipanema neighborhood, and I definitely recommend it. If one day I remember the name, I'll definitely let you know about it.
Now I'd like to ask some questions related to this topic. I'd like to ask about food and culture. What cultural role does food play in your country?
Wow, this is a bit of a tricky question for me. I'm very, very limited in the amount of things that I can eat. Um, so I'll try to answer this question based on my experience with other people. My partner, he really, really likes to experiment a place by trying food from that place. So if you go to a new country and if you try to have the taste of the local cuisine and see why do people, for example, why is Thai food so spicy? You have this flavor of the land. You have this experience of what it means to be there in that specific place because of the food. So I think you can experience different cultures through food, and it's an important part of the experience of traveling abroad, for example. And unfortunately, I cannot participate in it because I'm very limited in the amount of food and the kinds of food that I eat. Also, people don't go to restaurants just to eat. They go there to socialize. They go there for the environment, for the sound of how can I say, of the glasses, of the, wine, of all the instruments in the kitchen, for the music, for the experience of having, the waiter coming to you, giving a suggestion and so on. So in a different sense, I think the cultural role of food is much broader than just the food in itself. I think it's about the what does it mean to go with someone, with friends, family, a loved one, to a restaurant? And that's something that I would explore to analyze the role of food in culture as a whole.
How has food culture changed in your country over the last 20 years?
Well, I am 29 years old myself, so it's a bit harder for me to think of the last 20 years in an analysis. However, I would start this discussion by focusing on two things that are quite related but are not exactly the same. Chain food and chain restaurants and fast food. I feel like in Brazil, most of the chain restaurants were fast food. So whenever you talked about fast food, people would think of the typical hamburger place with French fries and things that can be considered not as healthy as a regular food, non-fast food kind of plate or dishes. And it has increased a lot in Brazil. There's more and more of fast food chains around the country. But something that I find very interesting is that other restaurants have been adopting the same kind of model, however, with more sophisticated, better quality food. So now you do see a lot of chain restaurants that actually have very good quality and are much healthier than a typical fast food restaurant in the country. So this is one of the consequences of fast food is I think the chainification, so to say, of other cuisines and other kinds of restaurant and environment. And secondly, I think fast food is becoming healthier. We see this here, at least in Canada, where we have the vegan burgers, and they're taken over here, they're taken over in Brazil, and they are healthier than your regular patty or regular meat hamburger. And I think this is a trend that is here to stay. I think fast food restaurants are gonna change countries where they are once again by probably introducing and inducing people to be a bit healthier with the choices that they propose in their menu.
What are your feelings about the use of genetically modified food?
Wow. Wow. My oh my. This is one of the trickiest questions you could come up with. I have mixed feelings about genetically modified food. I do think there is a lot of false information around, and people do get a bit too scared whenever there is something new. So now that we are able to have genetically modified food, people can get a bit scared and start spreading rumors around. And I think there is an anti-science, anti-progress bias sometimes for new technologies. People were afraid of the, impacts of cars and impacts of internet, and people seem to have a more gloomy view whenever something new emerges that is disrupting the way things were. On the other hand, we do know that there are dangerous components because we don't know what are the consequences long term for using genetically modified food. And we might think it's safe, but over time it might become something bad. You might make a super species for a certain plant, but in the future, one specific kind of plague might be able to decimate the entire production of that species, for example. So there are a lot of downturns and downsides to it as well. From a more pragmatic perspective, though, I can't help but think if anybody is really against poverty and famine and hunger in the world, we need to use genetically modified food. The extent of how much can we change the genetics of some foods, of some plants, it's a good question to make. But I do not think that we can have stop hunger and make the world a better place without using this kind of technology. The question for me is more how much of it shall we rely on instead of whether or not should we use genetically modified food.
Thank you. That is the end of the test.